move on. This is our 20th in the series on the book of Judges, and tonight we are going to be able to look at the judges by the name of Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, and then we'll get to even Samson tonight. We won't get very far. Our last message that we dealt with, we ended up with Jephthah, who it says judged Israel for 6 years, then died Jephthah the Gileadite and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. And so, but the thing is, that isn't the end of chapter 12. We still have 8 verses to go to get to the end of that chapter and begin in chapter 13. 8 verses, 132 words, 8 sentences is all we have. And that covers 3 judges, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, 25 years, all of which leads us up to the birth of Samson, who will judge Israel for some 20 years after 40 years, or really there's going to be 40 years of oppression by the Philistines. We'll read all of the heritage and the history of these 3 men in 1 minute. That's all it takes. Doesn't take very long. We want to remind you, because tonight you're going to see all 12 of the judges that you'll find in the book of Judges. Now that doesn't end with all the judges, and it doesn't cover all of those who ruled or did something, because we have Abimelech, who we also exclude, as many do, as a judge because he claimed to be king and they made him king. But tonight, number 9, Ibzan, number 10, Elon, number 11, Abdon, and number 12, Samson. But let's go ahead and begin to look at these scriptures. And after him, Ibzan, after Jephthah, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. And he had 30 sons and 30 daughters whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then died Ibzan and was buried at Bethlehem. And after him Elon, a Zebulonite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And Elon the Zebulonite died and was buried in Elon in the country of Zebulun. And then, let's see, verse 13 and 14. And after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel. And he had 40 sons and 30 nephews that rode on 70 ass colts. And he judged Israel 8 years. And Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon, in the land of Ephraim, in the mount of the Amalekites. Told you, 1 minute. It's all it takes to read all of them. It's rather quick. Ibzan's time of service was 7 years, as you read it. That follows Jephthah's short time of service. Ibzan's name, and I'm going to give you as much as I can on all of these guys, means splendid. And I think, too, that you can see that he gained a lot of prestige. Depending upon your identity of Bethlehem, there were 3 Bethlehems. Bethlehem of Judea, the most well-known, but there's also Bethlehem of Ephrathah and also Bethlehem of Zebulun. So if you identify Bethlehem as Bethlehem of Judea, then you're going to say he was of the tribe of Judah. But if you say he was of the tribe of Zebulun, then it's going to be Bethlehem of Zebulun. And I think it probably was Zebulun and not Judea. He is noted, it says, for having 30 sons and 30 daughters. That's 60 children. Mama had to be one tired woman. Doesn't say he had many wives. Doesn't give us any indicator there. And apparently, because of what we read from there, it seems like they all kind of lived on one compound. The other thing that's noted about them is he sent his daughters abroad to marry, and he received 30 daughters-in-laws from abroad as they married his sons. The word abroad is not an idea of meaning overseas or a long way off. It just simply means out of his house, out of his compound. Really, the rough is there out of his hut. So just out of his house. It was often a means, marrying with your children and arranging those marriages was often a means of expanding kingdoms or areas of rule, or to increase your influence. And it certainly was a means of making great alliances and having a great deal of influence. But we don't read about any of that. Again, we know that he judged Israel 7 years, and the area of his influence was very far and wide, considering his 60 children and the notation of the marriages abroad. A lot of commentators will say that his area of judgment was limited to the other side of the Jordan. And that could be, but it's conjecture. We do not know. Elon, of the 3 judges, Elon has the least written and known about him. All we know that is he judged Israel 10 years, and when he died, he was buried in Elon in Zebulon. His heritage and his history are not even mentioned. Only his time and service of his death are mentioned. His burial places him in the tribe of Zebulun. We're not told anything, really, or I should say we have limited information on at least 5 judges. I mentioned this before, that they are limited on the information, and they're called minor judges that are there, and they have little to nothing known about them. And these 3 are also very limited. Some say that Elon, his time as a judge, could have been right up to the time when Samson was born. Samson, will get into, probably began to judge Israel in his 20s, or even at 20 years old. Abdon is of the tribe of Ephraim. Twice he is mentioned as the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite. This gives the impression, and I think pretty substantially, that he was both born and buried in Pirathon. That was a region which was in the Mount of Amalek. Josephus writes, and again, I don't know how the fact that he was a Jewish historian, writes that his burial was magnificent. He also had many sons, 40, nephews, 30. Some say these are actually, the word is translated nephews for us, but it means grandsons. I don't know what it is there. It can be one way or the other. But there were 70 of them. And the 70 of them rode 70 ass colts. Now, that means, too, that they were in a distinction above others, that they had a position of power and prestige. In other words, these are not farm hands. You know, my grandfather, my namesake, had 10 children. He was a farmer. In fact, most of my lineage of my family were farmers. That's what they were. But these guys were not farm hands. They were distinctive, prestigious, and powerful. And probably they helped Abdon in the issuing of justice for Israel. They were all, though, whether you understand or know a lot about them, they were all empowered and chosen by God to deliver Israel. That's as much as we know. So let's move on to chapter 13, where we find our final list of the judges in the book of Judges, which is Samson. And we're not going to be able to cover everything tonight in chapter 13, but we are going to look first of all at Samson and his culture and his captivity. Now, I know we have our business meeting tonight, right? So when we get up to that point, we're going to stop instead of trying to push it to go on, because we're not going to get done even with the 13th chapter. But Samson's biography compares to Gideon's in length. In fact, it's even a little bit longer. It covers 4 chapters, 13, 14, 15, and 16. It's also something else that we find along with Gideon and Jephthah and Deborah, that he is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. as a hero of the faith. And though Samson is the last judge listed in the book of Judges, he is, as I said, not the last judge of Israel. In fact, the next judge after Samson is Eli. Eli judged Israel for 40 years. Interesting, he's not even in the book of Judges. But that's because it comes into the monarchy in 1st and 2nd Samuel. But after Eli, then is Samuel. Samuel judged Israel, it says in 1 Samuel 7 and 15, all the days of his life. Some will say it's less than 40 years, but over 30 years, somewhere in there. We're not sure exactly the time. But Samson is probably also the most well-known of all the judges, but not as a judge. People know about Samson as a muscular, mighty man, having power beyond what was normal, what is normal. Samson's recorded life is, I think, more concerning than even Jephthah's, both of whom teach us a great deal of negative lessons. But then that's the point of the book of Judges, isn't it? The book of Judges twice, in Judges 17 and 6, and also 21 and 25, say that every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It was a culture that was corrupt. Not always the judges were good quality men. Samson certainly didn't fit into the good spiritual men category. It's interesting to follow his story, because here is a man that, when we have looked so far at how they judged Israel, most of them raised an army, or they led a band of warriors. He's unique among the judges in the fact that he was a lone assassin who killed a large number of Philistines single-handedly and in unusual ways. The Philistines were consumed with Samson as their primary problem, their antagonistic arsonist. The Philistines were greatly troubled by Samson. They could not conquer one man, one Israeli, one man from one tribe. For 20 years, they could not control him. He kept the Philistines busy. But again, before we get there, we need to see again the culture and captivity that we can see from verse 1. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And because of that, the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. Now, this cycle, in the fact that it says again, has gone on for 300 years. That's a long time. Their evil was idolatry. We already have noticed it, and especially in the last couple of lessons, their evil idolatry was turning away from the worship and service of Jehovah, and they turned to the Philistine gods. In one aspect here, the Dagon, Ashdod, Baal, and there were several Baals, Ashtaroth, all who were gods of the Philistines. And because of their fall into this spiritual corruption and their idolatry, the Lord, as it says, delivered them into the hand of the Philistines, and they dominated Israel for 40 years. The Philistines almost appear to be the longest running of Israel's enemies. And we know that really the Philistines didn't end their domination until the time of David. 1 Samuel tells us how that the Philistines controlled Israel constantly through garrisons of soldiers. They controlled Israel's travel, they controlled their trades, and they even controlled their agriculture. I say that because they couldn't even sharpen a saw or an axe unless they went to the Philistines. They had no ability, no iron workers. In fact, they didn't have any iron at all that they could use. That kept them from making any weapons and raising an army to attack the Philistines. Well, it's no wonder then that we read that Samson used the jawbone of an ass. He didn't have swords and spears. During Saul's reign, it is noted that the Philistines had 30,000 chariots. Don't know how large their army was, but the oppression was strong, and it caused Israel to cry out, but you don't even read about it. You don't hear it. I wonder if it was Samson's parents that cried out. Could be. In answer to their cry, at least, God informs us of a man and his wife who have remained faithful, who have not fallen into idolatry. That's why we read Samson's parents in verse 2. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. Now we only know the father's name. Mom's name is never mentioned. Not in all the story. We don't know her name, but her wise character and her sharp obedience are prominently noted in this story. We know that they are from the tribe of Dan and they lived in Zorah, and we learn that he was certainly a worshiper of Jehovah and a prayer warrior. We learn from the last verse of Samson's story in chapter 16 that Manoah died prior to Samson's death, but no information is given beyond that fact, and you actually learn about it kind of casually. The mention of their location and tribe is the original inheritance given to them. A lot of the tribes were forced out of some of their areas because of the enemies. The Danites, they were still in their area, or at least this couple was. Then we come to an angelic appearance in verse 3. And the angel of the Lord, and we'll get into that probably later, appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold now, thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. This verse points us to a very rare occurrence of announcing both the conception and birth of a child by an angel of the Lord. In fact, there's not that many people you might recall. If you try to remember, think in your brain a little bit. Who can you remember whose birth, or I should say whose conception and birth was announced? Isaac's conception and birth was announced by God to Abraham. Elisha announces the conception and birth to the Shunammite woman. John the Baptist's conception and birth was announced by an angel to Zacharias. And of course, Jesus being placed in the womb, I won't say conception, but being placed in the womb and being born was also announced by Gabriel, an archangel. But it's interesting, Hagar was told about her child by Abraham, and she was told to name him Ishmael. David is told about Solomon and what to name him. It gives him a different name, to be born of Bathsheba. And then a man of God announces the birth of Josiah some 350 years before he is actually born. Now also we notice that he is born of a barren woman, which is also a rare occurrence, which belongs only to Samson, Isaac, Jacob, Samuel, and John the Baptist. So that's a miraculous birth. And there's not very many of those. And we know the name of every one of those barren women. But Samson's mom, we only know her as Manoah's wife. That's it. Once he announces the conception and a successful birth of this son, we learn more about this particular son by the name of Samson. Before we ever learn his name, we learn that he was called to be a Nazirite, not a Nazarene. Okay, I say that because people will talk about a Nazarene of the location. This is a Nazirite call, a Nazirite vow. In verses 4 and 5, he says, "Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive," let me get that. Next verse, "For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head." Important to note, right? We know that part of the story. "No razor shall come upon his head, for the child," what is he? He's a child already in the womb. It's not a fetus. He's a child. And he is to be called a Nazirite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. He shall begin. Never finishes the job quite. It's one of the interesting things that are there. As the angel of the Lord gives her these commands for herself and her child, because this does include her, he uses the Hebrew word shamar, which is translated there in verse 4, beware. In other words, she needed to protect the child by protecting and obeying these words, by keeping these words. It means to guard these words, pay attention and attend to them. Take heed, be careful to do 3 things. Now, there is a Nazirite vow that's in Leviticus that does not necessarily coincide with this. But this is what he's telling them. This is a Nazirite vow for them. And he tells them there are 3 things that they must do, that she must do, and then 2, you teach this child. No intoxicating beverages whatsoever. That means that he could not even drink any of the fruit from grapes, grain, or corn. Not even vinegar. Not a sip. Secondly, no unclean food. I won't go through the list there. You can look at Leviticus chapter 11 and get a list of the unclean food. And then no razor upon his head. This was an obvious, visible distinction from everyone else, and in particular from the Philistines, who did shave their heads. He is to be called a Nazirite. Now, this was not a voluntary choice. Many of the Nazirites were volunteers. They put themselves in that position. This had to do with his sanctification and his consecration to Jehovah. But you'll also notice that this sanctification and this consecration of these vows is connected to his strength and his power. This was a vow from conception to death. The whole span of his life, period. From the womb to the grave, he was to be separated and consecrated Jehovah. It's not unusual because of the fact that even Paul the Apostle in the New Testament talks about keeping his body subdued or to bring it into subjection that he might not become a castaway. It teaches us that there is something about sanctification and power from the Lord. You lose your power when you violate the rules that God has for your life. The person was connected, or the purpose was connected to the deliverance of Israel from the oppressor, from the Philistines. You and I have been called to serve God, but it isn't a forced service. It's conditional. We are blessed with power and strength when we walk in the might of the Lord. But when we abandon our commanded sanctification and consecration, we can lose our power. You don't lose the Spirit, but you lose your power. Let's look then at the wife's witness in verse 6 and 7, and I'll probably end with this one here. Now we come to the wife giving witness to her husband of this special and rare event. Then the woman came and told her husband, saying, "A man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God." That's because it was an angel of God, but she did not yet know that. But she says it was like the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible or very frightening. But I asked him not whence he was, neither told me his name. Some will say this is Christ, that this is the theophany that's here. This is the messenger of God. But we notice that she says it. She asked for no identification, so she couldn't tell her husband who it was that spoke to her, but any other description other than divine design, and she knew that this was from Jehovah. Verse 7, but he said unto me, behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink no wine nor strong drink. So she is including herself, again, that she could not defile, and she would have defiled the child if she violated any of those rules and laws. Neither eat any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. She retells the story the angel gave to her husband, and so there's nothing new that you're going to read there. I'll give you one more verse in the husband's entreaty, verse 8. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O my Lord, let the man of God, which did send, come again unto us, and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. Manoah doesn't question his wife's experience. At least we don't read any of that. Manoah immediately takes this to the Lord, and he asks for a repeat of the instructions and for clarity and an increase of information about raising up this child in the manner that the angel declared. And I can understand that. He recognizes and desires to obey the divine orders, and he wants further instructions. I kind of want to know, well, that's a pretty heavy-duty burden, Lord. Let us know a little bit more. But I'll give you a heads up. They don't get any additional information. Not one word additional. He seeks this wisdom, but I kind of wonder, did they really follow through with the teaching, self-discipline? Because Samson ends up pretty much doing what he wants to do. And he certainly has a wandering eye. And he marries a Philistine woman, and mom and dad just, okay. Or was this just something about his arrogance because of his power? Samson was an extremely powerful man and an extremely weak man. Powerful in one way and weak in another. Both Manoah and his wife seem eager to raise Samson according to this divine charge. And we assume, because she got that clear, that she obeyed what the instructions were. We should seek to raise our children in the admonition of the Lord. Amen. No question about that. God heard Manoah's prayer and answers him, but not exactly in the way that he asked. And next week we will look at the Lord's answer. And because God said that he did hearken to the voice of Manoah, and the angel did come. It's interesting. We got enough. Just to give me a little bit more. Look at what happens. God hearkened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again unto the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Well, golly, I guess the angel messed up his timing, huh? I don't think this was a problem of logistics. I don't think the angel was confused about the time or place and missed Manoah by that much. The angel came to the woman in the same place as before as she sat in the field. She was there and waiting. Manoah was busy. We're not told with what or why, but she took off running to get him. But I'm going to leave you there hanging a little bit. We'll find out next week a little bit more about this exchange between the angel and Manoah. And I think this is all interesting because it's important to the rest of the story. It's important to Samson's strength and why we learn about the hair and the cutting of it and the strength leaving him in that way. But we'll get into